Assalamu alaikum, everyone, and welcome back to This Hijabi Life. I'm your host, Hakeemah, and on this show, we talk to Muslim women about fashion and being visibly Muslim as hijabis in this modern world. And today I am super excited for our guest. But before we get into the guest, I'll give you a little bit of a backstory. So, growing up in Chicago, I have a really big family, and we would always gather together and watch game shows together. So I grew up very much a fan of game shows. I mean, the excitement of strategy and answering questions, and then the potential of winning so much money. But as I'm watching these shows, such as like Wheel of Fortune or Jeopardy or any of those shows, I would get this sense, even as a young girl, that it wasn't really a place where I could thrive as a Muslim woman wearing hijab. There would always be something in those shows that would make me exclude myself. And although I would love to be a contestant on a game show, I just erased it from any potential in my life. And then I started watching this show called The Mole. And this season was particularly exciting because there was a Black Muslim hijabi woman on the show, and she absolutely killed it as a contestant. So I got super excited. I watched the whole season, rooting for her the whole time. And today we have Muna Abdulahi, that contestant on The Mole, on the show today to talk about her experience as a contestant on The Mole as a Muslim hijabi woman. So welcome, Muna.
Hi, Hakeemah. Thank you so much for having me. I am so excited to talk about this.
I'm so excited too. I'm so excited as well. Muna, before we get into the actual experience on The Mole, I want everyone to know who you are, where you came from, what's your background, how were you as a child growing up, and what kind of led to this adventurous spirit that you have today?
Yeah, I was born in Atlanta, Georgia, but I grew up in Minnesota. I grew up in this small town called Wilmer, Minnesota. I grew up with 3 sisters, and we're all a year apart. So my sisters were my best friends growing up, and we constantly go on these adventures. We learned how to ride bikes at such a young age. I think like maybe 4, 3. Like we were all, when my older sister started learning to ride a bike, we all started to learn how to ride a bike. And I am the second. I'm the middle child of the 4. And so, yeah, I mean, growing up, it really was being that kid who wanted to be and do everything. I mean, there was that question people would ask is like, who do you want to be when you grow up? And my answer was all of the above. I wanted to try everything. My curiosity was such a big part of who I was and who I am. And so, yeah, and it manifested in my life in a lot of different ways of academia and hobbies. And yeah, so right now I work in tech, and I also am a spoken word poet. I also fly planes, and I also love to travel. And so that's a bit of my background.
So wait a minute, let's talk about the flying planes for a second. So you're a pilot?
Yeah, so currently have my private license. I wanted to learn how to fly. I didn't see myself being a commercial pilot and having that as a career, but I just wanted to know the skills. I wanted to just be in the sky and go wherever I want to go. And I wanted to just learn what it meant to be a pilot. And so just out of curiosity, I went ahead and started to train and learn. And so, yeah.
That's incredible. That's actually incredible because, I mean, learning how to fly, I mean, if that doesn't lend to an adventurous spirit or like high dreams and big hopes, I don't know what would, like people who learn this incredible skill. I mean, that really speaks to the mindset of dreaming big and doing, like you said, anything under the sun. So when I opened the show, I talked about how, sometimes when you're watching, whether it's a game show or anything, on TV, and you're seeing this representation on the screen, sometimes you try to relate that back to yourself, like, okay, if that person's doing it, maybe I can do it too. But there's a part well, at least for me, and I know that it has to be relatable to a lot of young Muslim girls growing up, that whether it's self-imposed or society imposes it on you, that you feel like you can't actually thrive in certain spaces. Like you see people doing something and you're like, oh my God, that is so cool. But how can I actually do that as a Muslim woman? How does my hijab, how does my like Muslim lifestyle, like besides hijab, how does like prayer fit into this? And I feel like that's a little bit detrimental, you know, to like the spirit of especially like a young child growing up. So, I mean, I feel like you've already answered it by saying like you're literally a pilot. I mean, you can fly. You had a lot of like adventure spirit growing up. But was there ever a part of you that related to that young girl inside of me, for example, that always felt like, I want to do that thing, but maybe that's not a space for me?
No, absolutely, absolutely.
Yes.
You see, it, I think both of those are tied together, right? It's like, okay, first, you don't see people like you doing these things, right? So does that? It makes you ask that question of like, okay, does that give me permission? Does that give me permission to enter these spaces? And if I do, what does that mean? Because in its own way, representation also talks about systems, because if you don't have people like you in these spaces, that means there's not a system set up for you to already exist in these spaces, right? So like prayers, and when they talk about like, things like touching, like handshaking other men, right? So it's like these systems haven't already been created. So what does that mean? What does that mean for us to enter into space and be like, hey, this is not for me, this is not my lifestyle, but I also want to coexist in this space and play this game? And what does that
Yeah.
look like? And you have to ask yourself that. And I mean, that took up, I would say, like 85% of my brain during the whole show. Was like, okay, I'm entering into this game. I've communicated, right? And I know we'll get into this more. I've communicated who I am, what are my boundaries, what are the things I need to meet for myself, and who I am and what I'm about. But also, there's one thing to communicate, but also it's another thing to like constantly have to shape these systems for you to be in. So,
Yeah, I'm so glad that you mentioned that. Firstly, it seems as if you advocated for yourself ahead of time, right? Communication is key, and I feel like the representation part is only just half of the journey. Like once you see some, like when I saw Muna on screen, I'm like, oh my God, I'm rooting for her all the way. Like that's my girl. I'm rooting for her from the beginning all the way until she drops out, and hopefully she doesn't. So you see yourself in that person, but then also like how can you see yourself actually playing out, that person's footsteps? And so that takes action, that takes communication, that takes advocacy, because as a Muslim living a lifestyle, you take your Islam with you wherever you go. And I think when you're a child, there is a gap there. If no one in your life, or maybe the lower voices in your life are maybe telling you, yeah, maybe you can, but the majority is like, maybe not. Maybe choose something where the space already accommodates you. And I think it's so refreshing. It was so refreshing, and we'll get into this after the break. When you, instead of having yourself excluded from a space, instead you entered that space and had the space accommodate you. And I think that's the mindset shift that we need to make as Muslim women, so that we can feel a lot more free to take that leap from representation to actually accomplishing that goal, whatever it is. So Mona, we've talked a lot about, representation on the big screen and what that means for young girls or youth watching, and their dreams, coming true by looking at women who kind of look like them on screen. And I think that representation is very strong when you are someone aspiring to wear hijab, or you wear hijab and you see someone wearing hijab on screen as well. And so a lot of times as Muslim women, we talk about our hijab journey. So what has your hijab journey been like so far?
I think this is such a beautiful and important question. And I would say I've been so lucky growing up. Alhamdulillah, I was one of the lucky people who had parents who instilled the hijab at a very young age. And so I started wearing the hijab. My parents started wearing me English. My parents started having me wear the hijab, I think as little as 4 years old. In preschool, I was wearing the hijab, right, all the way up. And so on one end, it's like there is such an immense amount of blessings in that, and having that support, and having that family structure of people who have who are closer to Deen and want you to be close into that Deen, but also have a system within our family who encourages the hijab. But there's also that other end of the stick, which is I grew up in predominantly white spaces, and I grew up in predominant spaces where, you know, I'd be in my class and I'd be the only one wearing hijab, right? And I think for me, I've been lucky to have the hijab associated with my girlhood. But at the same time, as I'm growing up with everybody else in my hometown, you know, we start to have those questions of, okay, you know, everybody else is not wearing hijab, right? So like, what does that mean for us? Like, how do we fit in, right? And I think everybody always has that girlhood moment of just trying to not be alienated. And I think for me, I've definitely been tested, and I think a big part of it also ties to not really necessarily getting those questions answered when I was young of like, why am I wearing the hijab? I've worn it since I was so young, and I've never had the opportunity to be given the answer of like, you wear this hijab for A, B, C, and D. So without having that answer, I think I really only had this is good and this is bad, right? So when I started to have these thoughts of like, oh, I just want to fit in with everybody else, then there's this constant tug and pull of like shame being at the center of it all, rather than just having conversations about it. And I think for me, my test was really centered around how can I be me, but also feel like I belong without having those mentors or those people who can give me these answers. And so I think there started to become these questions of like, not feeling good about my hijab, not feeling good, not feeling pretty, not feeling like I belong, not feeling like I'm constantly alienated from the hijab. And so I think for me, I went on this test and this journey of having an experience where I didn't have the hijab. And in that, alhamdulillah, I'm so grateful for that moment, because at that time I had a lot of shame associated for that. But for the person that I am now, I would not be who I am, who genuinely understands the pure reason why I wear the hijab and wakes up every day wearing the hijab because I know fully heartedly there's nobody else I want to be than a hijabi woman. And I think the hijab journey never ends. The hijab journey never ends. And I think having questions like this and having these dialogues like this where we talk about, you know, nobody's perfect. We're all constantly growing with our hijab. Has been a great journey in my adulthood of being a hijabi woman and finding those connections and those bonds and those moments of getting closer to my hijab through community. So
Yeah. I think that's such a beautiful response. And it's so real. It's so real, Mona, because so many people go through exactly what you're going through. You know, what you've gone through. You feel very empowered, and, you know, there's nothing you'd rather be other than a hijabi Muslim woman right now. But maybe 5-10 years ago, myself, you, and maybe some of the viewers watching right now didn't feel as close to it. And there's different journeys towards getting close to it. And then there's paths where you don't feel as connected to it. But I think that's the nature of a human being, right? I think sometimes we put so much pressure on ourselves to kind of perform these acts like, okay, I'm going to put it on properly for like the acceptability of my community. I'm going to be doing this and that while wearing it. But then you have a soul, you have emotions, and those things can manifest in the way in which your hijab is worn, or if it's not worn at that time, you know, or your connection to it. And I think after hearing your response, I think a lot of people out there will feel less shame. You mentioned the word shame too. That's very real. There's a shame involved in, you know, maybe the way that people perceive the way that you're wearing a hijab, or the fact that you weren't as close to it at a certain point. But that relatability, it's undeniable. So many women are going through the exact same thing, and then there's judgment on that up and down with the hijab. And at the end of the day, your hijab is an act of worship, and that is between you and Allah. It's not between you and the community. Absolutely. It's not between you and anyone else. And so I think just sharing that piece, I'm telling you, it really can help someone to understand that there is no shame in going back and forth. What you should be proud of is that you're maintaining that connection with Allah, and that can look differently at different times in your life, especially as you're going through girlhood, like you mentioned, adolescence, and then finding who you are as a Muslim woman. So thank you so much for sharing that piece about your hijab journey, and we'll be back after the break. Welcome back to This Hijabi Life. Today we are talking to Muna Abdulahi, who was a contestant on the second season of The Mole on Netflix. And we talked a little bit about your personality, Muna, and how you grew up being very adventurous, and a little bit about your hijab journey. Now let's get into The Mole, okay? So tell us, for those who have not watched the show, tell us a little summary about what the show is actually about. And I'm dying to know what made you feel like you could be a good contestant on that show.
Yeah. Okay. So a summary of The Mole. It's basically a game within a game within a game, right? So you have 12 strangers coming to this new country, and one person, so everybody is a player except for one person who is designated as the mole, who basically is like, the best way to put it is like an employee from production who they've hired to act like they're a player, right? And in all of this, everybody's trying to add money to this pot, this group pot, that only one person will win at the end, right? So there's missions throughout the whole thing where we're working all together as a team, except the mole, who's trying to sabotage and trying to make everybody lose money to not add money to this pot. And while that's happening, there's only one winner. And the way that that is figured out is everybody else who's not the mole is trying to figure out who amongst us is the mole while trying to add money to this pot. And so what happens is we all take a quiz after each mission, and we all answer 20 simple questions on who, okay, they're not simple, but 20 questions about who the mole is. And the person with the least amount of answers correctly ends up leaving, and then it gets repeated.
Yeah. So given that this show has a lot of like strategy involved, there's a lot of like, I guess you have to take notes to see like who was acting kind of strange, who was sabotaging. What is there something about you that made you feel like, okay, I could actually excel at this game and win that pot because I have this set of skills that would make me a winner?
Absolutely. I feel like there's a couple of things. Number one, I'm very strategic. I'm very analytical. I'm very somebody who knows my math, and I know my numbers, and I know my way of looking into a group and being able to read people. And I think a big part of that is, you know, growing up as a Muslim woman who grew up in a space where I was in the minority, right? So being able to enter into a room, read people, and understand how I can connect with people, understand who, just being able to read people, as well as adaptability. I knew that like whatever I was thrown at, whether that be, you know, a cave mission or a heist or whatever, I would be able to enter into that space, figure out what key components I would need, and get the job done. And then also, I would say I'm just somebody who plans 10 steps ahead. I'm always 10 steps. Honestly, I'm 20 steps ahead. And so I think another thing about that is I feel like in this space, people would underestimate me. You know, people have this perception of who they believe Muslim women are, whether that be, you know, silent, people who are followers, people who are in the background, right? That's not who I am. That is not who I am. I am a leader. But at the same time, I can use these perceptions to advance myself in the game like it's a chess game. And so, yeah.
I remember one of the missions, which I thought was like so sneaky. I get so excited about game shows, so excuse me while I like squeal.
Me too.
But
me
like,
too.
but there was a mission where you could like watch the person's audition tape in order to see like what did they reveal to production in order to like audition to be on the show. And one of the questions was, what would make you a good mole? And you mentioned that the fact that, you know, a lot of times people perceive Muslim women as like submissive, meek, not able to figure it out,
Yeah.
and even on a show where everyone there should be strategic, everyone there should be taking notes, everyone should be paying attention. They might be looking at the Muslim woman like, man, that passed her up. She doesn't even understand what just now happened. And
Yeah.
so you would play on that in order to confuse people and let them think that, oh yeah, I didn't catch that, when really you caught it. And you caught it very well, probably better than other people, which is why you actually almost won, but we'll get to that point. So about the perception of being meek or submissive, and then you actually not being like that at all, were there actual missions where you directly played on that stereotype in order to get ahead?
Yeah, I think so. Right off the bat, in the very first mission, I played off of that, and I think what happened is like, because what you notice is like in the beginning, I'm making all these beautiful connections with these people, and I think the reality is the connections and forms conversations that I have with these people are genuine. It's me, right? But at the end of the day, we all came here to play a game. And I think what happened is people just assumed that like, I would not be able to like play the game. I would just still be me. I would still, and I think that played into people choosing me. They liked me, yes. But I think that they believed off of who they perceived me to be, that I wouldn't even at all think about even taking that phone advantage, right? And so I think it was so interesting too, because I really didn't have to do a lot. I think people just, the other two folks looked more suspicious than me, and that played into the strategy where I was thinking 3 steps ahead, right? I took the phone advantage to get ahead in this game, because that first mission, you don't know who it is. Nobody knows nothing from left and right. It could be anybody, right? But also, it gave me this opportunity where I could put all 3 of us as suspect list, and all 3 of us I didn't think were suspicious, right? So it gave me this opportunity to throw people into a direction that I knew most likely was not the right direction. So I think that first mission, and then you see me throughout, I do cause these suspicious behaviors, and it was kind of like a double bluff, right? It's like Muna would never do that, but what if she does, right? It's like she would be this, wow, if she was the mole, it'd be like this crazy. So it was this double bluff of like being a player, playing as a mole, playing as a player. So yeah, I definitely played into it.
Yeah, you definitely had me at some point. So from the time I saw the thumbnail, I was like, okay, I'm definitely watching this, because is that a Muslim woman I see running around in the thumbnail? Like the little like trailer. And then like I'm like, for sure she's not the mole. I'm rooting for her to win the money. And then there was some times when I was like, wait a minute, is she the mole? Because you really played into that. And I think early on, like you mentioned, trust. People kept on saying, oh, well, I trust Muna. And I think there was a time where you were playing into that. Like you were like, okay, I will do the trustworthy thing to do. And then you kind of switched. And I was like, oh, wow, that's real mole behavior. Like to build the trust and then be like, oh yeah, I'm going to sabotage. But it's so fun. I mean, it's all about playing the game. It's how to play the game, right? You're trying to just win the game. Okay, so early on as well, people started to mention, oh, Muna is the best dressed. And I hope that when we put this up, we can show some pictures of like you in like the Somali blue. That's why I wore blue today.
Yes!
Because you were in like the Somali blue outfits. Yes. And I felt like, wow, not only, okay, Muslim woman, Black Muslim woman, hijabi Black Muslim woman, but also like I'm a fashion girl. So I'm checking like what you're wearing as well. Like I'm really, checking for the outfit. Definitely. So I know that as it's beyond what you wear, of course, but this is a show about fashion. So I want to know, like, what were some of the tips that or some of the things that you followed in order to pack like the best suitcase for these missions? Because you're in hot climate, you're doing things like going into caves and swimming, and like, but at the end of the day, you're slaying like every single time you get on screen. So give us some of your tips as to like how to dress for these types of things.
Yeah, no, I'm so happy you brought that up, because like one of my main things going into this game was like, yeah, I'm here to play a game, but I'm here to showcase and represent Muslim women to a T. I'm here to showcase that, like, yes, we are these, bright and beautiful and these leaders, and like we can go into a mission and look good and like still be still be covered and still showcase our values and who we are while still looking good at it. And so getting ready was so fun.
Yeah.
I mean, I grew up with sisters, so we all love all things fashion, and it was really a group project. It was all of us like figuring out what outfits we want to bring. And I only got to bring 2 large suitcases, and I was so
Mm-hmm.
dedicated to like bring all the looks that I literally going to the airport, I literally was wearing like layers of outfits because I wanted to bring every single look that I wanted to bring. And so, yeah, I mean, it was a mixture of trying to bring a variety of colors. I knew even though we brought our outfits, there was a wardrobe director who would basically pick the outfits that we would be wearing on each mission, each time we're on camera. So the first day while I was in Malaysia, we literally laid out all the outfits, and they basically went through them and was like, okay, you're gonna wear this on the first day, second day, blah, 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 blah. But nonetheless, I think the main thing was like trying to bring as a variety of different kinds of colors, different types of styles, different types of, uh,
Mm-hmm.
ways that I can show up and show out. And so it was so fun.
Yeah. Thank you so much for telling me about that, because I know that so many people were clocking your outfits and figuring out how can I actually like replicate these outfits that Mana is wearing. So you look beautiful the whole time, mashallah.
Thank you so
We do have to go for a break. We'll go for a break and we'll come back and talk more with Mana Abdulahi from The Mole. Welcome back to This Hijabi Life. Today we've been talking with Muna, who was a contestant on season 2 of The Mole, one of my favorite game shows. And I want to take us to July 15th. You wrote an Instagram post, which is when I realized that, you know what, I'm going to send a message because I want to talk to this girl. She is so inspiring. You wrote an Instagram post, and I'm going to read your caption. It says, becoming the representation in places that little me deeply yearned for growing up watching TV is something I can't even put into words. I got to play my game and show up fully from start to finish because of the work they did of setting up structures to make sure my needs and boundaries were met behind the scenes in an ever-changing game and environment. A truly special thank you to Macy and Gabe, who carried my prayer bag and bottle of water for me to make wudu in case there wasn't a bathroom wherever we went. Always found a place for me to pray. These are very, very important key points. And kept track of prayer times for me because you're in Malaysia, and you're doing a lot of stuff. Truly meant a lot to me. Thank you dearly to the lovely Sarah, the only woman in audio and mic department who was always ready to set up my mic every time. Again, very, very important to have a woman be the one to interact with you and touch you in the places where to like set up your mic. Heartfelt thank you to my cast members who always had my back from the very beginning, making sure my boundaries and needs were considered in the littlest details and spoke up for me at times before I even got there. You all are truly family. I read that caption and I immediately talked to the producer of the show, and I sent a message to you and I said, I need to talk to her because what I'm reading here is that, again, at the beginning, we talked about not wanting to be a part of a space because you don't know if it's going to work out for you as a Muslim. Instead of making that space accommodate you as a Muslim because it's important enough, because it can happen. Someone can walk around with your wudu bottle and your prayer garment for you. Talk to us a little bit more about, how important that was for you and, what it meant for you to have not only just the production, but the cast members like just really show up for you, and you could be unapologetic, do your game, have fun, and be just as Muslim as outside of the game show.
this post, honestly, writing it made me so emotional, and I think it ties back to going back to girlhood and what you mentioned about, you know, watching a show and being like, yep, you see one thing, you see a couple of things are like not something that you do, right? And it's like, okay, I can't do this. I can't do this because da 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 da, right? And that was a big part of a lot of the things that I wanted to try, you know. And I think not having that representation, not having, you know, the answers, what it would be like to put yourself out there, and to say, this is what I need. This, I want to be a part of this, but this is what I need for me to take up space here. It's a scary thing. It's a scary thing because there's way too many examples of times where it has not worked out and it has been in a lot of hardship and a lot of pain. And so for me, it ties back to what I said before of like, when they told me they wanted me to be part of this, I was so ecstatic. But the first thing I thought about was like, hey, do you understand what that would mean? Let's have that conversation, what that would mean
Yeah.
to be a part of this, right? And alhamdulillah, it was such a beautiful conversation. And I talked about the littlest details. You know, I made it a point to not even like sit next to men, and I made that a big point specifically because I was like, I just don't want any interaction or any moments where there could be a moment where my boundaries are crossed, right? Because a lot of the times what happens is like unconscious. It's already systems that are already set where it's like shaking the hand, doing all these things are already just, you don't think about it. You don't think about greeting people the way that you greet people, you know? And so in my head, I was like, let me set up boundaries where I just wouldn't be in situations where it might cause me to be in a situation where my boundary is crossed, right? And so what happened is it's like going into it, and the hardest day was that first day because what okay, English. Okay. The hardest day was that first day, specifically because yes, production knows, right? Production knows I need, you know, my prayer. I need to do this, A, B, and C. And there's also castmates, right? Where they don't know who I am, right? They don't know that a Muslim woman's going on to the show. They don't know nothing except that first day where we all meet, right? So I'm gonna have that moment where we all meet for that first time, and every man is gonna come forward like a handshake, like, "Hi, nice to meet you," and I have to be like, "I'm sorry, I can't shake your hand, but it's so lovely to meet you." And I have to question, "Oh my God, is this moment gonna affect my game? Are these people gonna be like, oh, I don't want to work with her because you know this and this and this, right?" And so you ask yourself all these questions about like me being in this space. Yes, can I exist and be who I am fully, but also too where like while I am existing and being who I am fully, how is that gonna better me or undermine me in this game? Am I gonna have a big disadvantage to staying true to myself? Am I gonna have a big disadvantage to saying no to alcohol and sitting in the corner with my water while they do a cheers, right? Am I gonna have a disadvantage on all the high fives that people are sharing and all those group moments, and I'm the one who's not partaking, right? Does that give me a disadvantage? And you have to ask yourself that question when you're going into this game. And alhamdulillah, what I realized is once we got to those moments, and once we got to those moments where I have to physically and verbally claim who I am and what I represent and my boundaries, became a beautiful moment where not only did the people around me listen to me and seek to understand, but they carried and helped me to not only abide by that, but for other people around me to also understand and listen. There was such a beautiful moment where, so the thing about this game is you're constantly traveling, right? So even though your castmates understand, even though the main people in production may understand, there's so many people who are like in the art department, people who are in there's so many people who are working on this project, on this show. So you can't tell every single one of these people that information. And that's what I thought. And there was a moment where we just finished that tin mission. And there were some people who were working on the setting up some of the structure there. And it was time for prayer. So I was in the restroom and I just came out, and there was this local there. And he's like, "Oh my God, are you Muna?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And he said, "MashaAllah." There was this beautiful meeting that we had where they mentioned that a Muslim woman is, here, and that if she is praying, to not cross her or to not, A, B, and C. And I just had a moment where I was like, wow, not only did they listen, but they went to that full extent. You know what I mean? They went that full
Yeah.
extent to make
Yeah.
sure that I was good.
Mhm.
And alhamdulillah, but the truth is, it was not all sunshine and rainbows. There was definitely a lot of things that happened where I had to constantly say, hey, I had to bridge that gap in understanding, right? Because a lot of it is just not understanding. And
Mhm.
the reality is that we're shooting inconsistently. We might be shooting the day, we might be
Yeah.
shooting the night, we might be shooting, we might be shooting all these different time zones. And
Mhm.
that affects my prayer time, right? They took our phones that first day, so
Yeah.
we didn't have our phones that whole time. And my phone is the
Mhm.
main way that I know when it's prayer time, right? And so, yeah,
Yeah.
Gabe and Macy were people who worked on in production, and they made sure I was good. And it was also what I realized a big part of the fun was staying true to myself, making my prayers, but also like I was praying in a lot of interesting places. We were in the that beach scene, right? The treasure hunt. I was praying in the shack in the back, right? And then we were what other mission? We were at just all these different locations where I would have to adapt and shift and move, and I'd
Yeah.
just be new locations of prayer. I would see all these different places, and then there was
Yeah.
also these lovely, lovely people who, because you have to understand, these are not sets, these are not set design, these are real places, real people's homes. You see me
Yeah.
make that comment in episode
Mhm.
in that in the search mission where I'm like, hey y'all, please don't go through all that. Like this is somebody's home because it is somebody's home, and so and so there are people whose actual homes we were at where they would be like, please come pray. Have a room in the back. Yes, please, welcome. And so alhamdulillah, it was such
Yeah.
all around. It was such an experience of what I realized is me being true to myself, me staying fully as myself, um,
Mhm.
and communicating that with other people. What it did was it allowed me to form even more genuine and real connections and build bridges with people who are different than me, who may have not known a lot of information, but now they understand, who were asking me questions about Islam, who were asking me questions about and wanting to seek more and knowing our faith. And mashallah, it was such a
Mhm.
beautiful, beautiful experience.
I'm so proud of you, Mona. Like, you don't understand. Like, this is something that so many people need to hear. I am 37 years old. Like I'm grown, right? And I'm taking inspiration from you because there are so many instances where you have to speak up in order to prioritize your Muslim identity. Like that simple handshake. Do you know how many times, like a Muslim woman might actually still stick her hand out, even if she's one who abides by the not shaking hands, just to make everybody comfortable, just so
And I
that the
still
man
have those
doesn't think that,
moments. I still
yeah,
have those moments because it's like you were
yeah,
exactly saying. It's I think as Muslim women, as women in general, we are a big part of ourselves is being kind and nurturing and loving, and to not embarrass
hmm,
or to not make people feel uncomfortable. And I think at times that also means making ourselves uncomfortable for other people to feel comfortable. And
exactly.
so I think it really is, like you said, claiming who you are and claiming like this is not what I do. And it's awkward and
Yeah,
it's scary and it's a lot of times and I think a
yeah,
lot of times it is
yeah,
such a moment, but still you feel so beautiful at the end of that experience, at the end of the moment where they
yeah,
have their moment, whether that be, oh, I'm sorry, or whatever it is that they experience. At the end of the day, you stay
yeah.
true to yourself. And mashallah, what an experience that is to claim that.
Yeah, very rewarding. Yeah, very rewarding. And Allah says, that if we stay on this path, and you will make mistakes, you will consider, doing this or that you might not, otherwise do just for the comfort of other people. But if you stay on that istiqamah, right, then Allah will reward you at the end. And you, I mean, you're a manifestation of that. I mean, you had such a rewarding experience. You stayed in your Muslim identity. And then at the end of the show, you almost won. But we'll talk about the feedback you might have gotten at the end of the show. We do have to go for a break, and we'll talk about, where Muna ended up at the end of the mole and any feedback that she might have gotten after her experience when we come back after the break. Welcome back to the show. Today we've been talking with Muna, who was a contestant on the second season of The Mole. And we were talking right before the break about how, you had a lot of, istiqama with your dean in being able to play the show, have a lot of fun, almost win. So you came in second place, spoiler alert, after the show wrapped. And you kept up your Muslim identity the whole time. And for that, we're so inspired. We're so proud of you. And we were rooting for you the whole time. What has been your feedback after the show wrapped and people were able to digest, everything that happened with the show? What has been some of your feedback? Positive, negative, like from family, community, online? What's it been like for you?
One of the main comments is people are like, you should have sabotaged that last mission, and it would have, been the thing that got you to the end. I mean, to win. But honestly, at that point, Michael and I, we both knew, based off of our friend Michael's alliance, and just like overall friendship, you could tell that it was one of those things where I knew that Michael knew that he knew that I knew that he knew, right? So it's like, even though none of us said, oh, it's Michael, we both knew most likely that we were both going for Sean. So at that point, I was like, let's get our money and may the best player win. Now, in regards to people's reactions, in that moment, I was so devastated because I'm just a competitor and I was so passionate about winning. And alhamdulillah, I think what I realized, especially after watching this show, I got way more than money could have ever even got from that experience. The outpour of love from the Muslim community and just from everybody who's been watching has been so beautiful and so fulfilling. And I think the messages, especially from teenage girls, from young girls who have been reaching out saying how much it's been a healing experience, not even just teenage adults would reach out and be like how much of an experience it is, a healing experience to get to see that representation on a show where I am not a background character. I'm not a side character. I am a full human being, and with personality, with passion, with drive, with curiosity, and with intelligence. There's so much to me that was showcased and put at the forefront of the show, where it was like, yes, we're playing a game, we're having fun, there's money in stakes, there's high stakes, but at the end of the day, I was myself and I was true, and that got me to the end. And that, to me, is more fulfilling than anything could have ever been. So alhamdulillah, it's been so beautiful.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you had a positive experience thereafter, because I know sometimes as soon as people see a Muslim woman, it might be triggering to them in a different way. So may Allah continue to protect your experience thereafter and let you just soar to new heights and have even more opportunities after the show. What's next for you? What are some pursuits that you might have since the show wrapped?
Thank you, sister. I do have my sights set on other shows. There's some other shows.
Oh yeah, okay.
I'm just so competitive. I'm looking for my win, Hakeemah. I'm looking for my win. But
yeah,
I would say overall, though, alhamdulillah, I've been working on a lot of projects and a lot of the pursuits that I do, whether that be, I have a forthcoming poetry book coming out. I have been pursuing a lot of building things. I really want to build a plane. I want to build a plane. I have a lot of just hobbies or intentions. I want to travel more. And yeah, you can,
Yeah.
or anybody who wants to follow this journey of adventure and curiosity that I explore, can follow me on social media at Muna Abdulahi _. And yeah, and inshallah, whatever opportunities do come, I know Allah
Yeah.
has the best plan, and so I have nothing but excitement for the future.
I'm so excited for you as well. I think you would be really good as a motivational speaker as well.
You think
Just to be booked to talk to young girls. I really do think so because, people need a voice to speak to young Muslim girls, young Somali Muslim girls, young Black girls, Muslim or not, and I think you have a good message. You have a really good message of being yourself despite anything and, breaking barriers and playing on people's stereotypes just to, teach them a lesson at the end. And then at the end, there's connection and community and you feel that fulfillment. And I think it's almost perfect, although I would have loved for you to get the money, but it's also perfect that, Allah's plan is always perfect, right? The fact that you didn't, but you also feel so rewarded and fulfilled by the experience itself. It's not like you're like, oh my God, I wasted my whole time, on the show. There was connections, there was dispelling of stereotypes, there was you having your own fulfillment, regardless of how it was, to other people. Like you got to get your adventurous spirit out. You got to fly to new heights and, experience new things and open up your mind. Like those are really great themes for young girls. So if anybody watches this and and you're willing to, I would love to come to like a Muna Abdullahi like little speech, because I think those are really good take home messages, especially for young girls. So as we wrap up, I wanted to just we just mentioned the fact that you are very inspirational. What would be just like one or two tidbits that you would tell a young girl or any youth, it could be a boy as well, about how you can remain yourself while being hyper visible, especially on such a big network as Netflix. I mean, millions of people are going to be watching. Just a line of inspiration to the youth out there.
When I was a teen, the biggest worry that I had was about the fact that staying true to who I am in a space where I am the only one is that I won't have as much of a voice or as much as potential or as much as ability to succeed because of how different I am. But what I realized is it's never been that question. What the real question is by staying true to yourself and to your voice and to your beliefs and to who you are and the values that you pertain, how much more can you succeed? How much more space can you take up? How much more of an inspiration and a passion and a belief and who you are you taking up? And if you were not to stay true to yourself, how much of yourself are you lessening and making smaller, and how much of that is that cost here? I think that reframing is so important in giving space to how much more space you can take up and be successful as yourself in your truth. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Mona. I really appreciate talking with you. I'm such a big fan. And if you get to be on any other shows, I will be looking for you in those thumbnails on Netflix so that I can watch you in your next journey. So thank you so much for being here, Mona. And at the end of every show, I like to give my little tidbit as well. I'm a mother of 3 young girls, and I strive every day to set to them a good example of being unapologetic, of showing up, of being unapologetic about not just my Muslim identity, but parts of my personality of like loving humor and love, just like being fully myself. And I see how important that is for young girls. I mean, they're always looking at mommy and doing what mommy does. And for anyone out there who is caring for young children, whether that be girls or boys. I know that most of the people watching the show might be women. Just be careful as to how you are cultivating their sense of self. I think it's really important that, you know, when I was younger, I could see now that there were certain parts of my perception of the world that made it seem as if, you know, I was erasing myself out of the ability to participate in certain things because, well, I'm a Muslim girl and so I can't. Oh, I'm going to be wearing hijab and so I can't. And so it was really important that, you know, someone in my life started to tell me that no, it's not that you can't, it's just that the space needs to be different for you, you know, or that something needs to change about not you, but the world around you that can accommodate, you know, your biggest dreams to be accomplished. And so be that voice to a young girl, whether that be your daughter or your niece, or if you're a teacher, you might have a lot of children in your classrooms. Be that voice that allows that young girl or boy to identify that, wait a minute, is that a negative thought that I'm having where I'm thinking I can't do something? Identify that and replace that with a positive. I'm such a big proponent of like positive parenting, not telling a child necessarily so much that they can't, but what they can do to replace that instead. So thank you so much again for choosing to tune in to This Hijabi Life. I hope you really enjoyed the episode. And of course, we're always bringing really great guests to the show, talking about Muslim women, modest fashion, and our journey through hijab as we are in this hyper-visible modern world. So thank you for tuning in. Stay blessed and covered beautifully.